So we're delighted to have Susan Crane with us today from the Redwood City Catholic Worker. She has been sentenced to 229 days in prison in Germany for her acts of nonviolent civil disobedience at the Buchel Air Force Base in Germany. So we're so glad to have you here, Susan. And please introduce yourself and what you would like people to know about you.
Thank you, David. So I grew up in New Jersey and in a working class family, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to college and then into the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps was very educational for me because I saw that some of the same corporations that are here in the United States were in Ethiopia, and some of the same military influences here in the United States were in Ethiopia then too. And I saw the poverty there, and it didn't make any sense for people to be killing each other, for anyone to be killing another mother's kid. You know, it just didn't seem right to me. So I came back, and we were in the middle of Vietnam, and that limited where I could get a job, because when I applied for jobs, I'd go through the interview, and then, well, what are you doing to support the war? And they'd tell me, and then I'd say, well, I can't work for you then. And I was a math major, so that I felt like there wasn't a way for me to get a job in my field, what I considered my field at that time. So I ended up being part of a situationist group, a group called the Radical Action Cooperative. And we were trying to live in a way that was different from the society, without class, without economic barriers, without hierarchy, and treating each other as brother and sister. And we started studying that, and studying the times in history when workers rose up and had control of the production and control of their lives. And so I wanted to help bring about that beloved community.
Hooray! Good work. And you've been doing it ever since.
Yes, in very different ways, but...
So tell us more about how you got to where you are today. What made you an anti-nuclear activist?
Well, actually, I was against nuclear power and was in the Diablo Canyon demonstrations. And we were held in tents, and the police held us overnight several days, and we had workshops. And there were people talking about nuclear weapons, saying, well, you can't just be against nuclear power, you have to be against nuclear weapons too, because they're connected. And that made so much sense to me. So then that's sort of what was the influence to that. And we went to Vandenberg Air Force Base, and we continued demonstrations against war and nuclear weapons.
Right.
And then, just several years ago, I guess in 2016, Marion Kupker from Germany and John LaForge came to a big Catholic Worker National gathering, and they gave a presentation about the nuclear weapons that are in Europe, the H-bombs, the B-61 H-bombs that are in several bases in Belgium and Turkey and the Netherlands and Italy and Germany. And it didn't occur to me that the U.S. had nuclear weapons in these forward bases that sort of surround Russia. And I was surprised at that. And Marion said, the German people don't want these weapons here. There's been polls taken, they don't want them. And we've had a camp outside the base and have been demonstrating against them for years, since 1996, I think the camp was there. And we would like some American war resistors to join us. And so since we were invited, that seemed like a good idea. And the next summer, John LaForge from Nuke Watch organized a U.S. peace delegation to go to Germany. And we joined this camp. There were 64 different German peace groups that got together and made this camp right outside the base. It was an amazing community experience. And there were international Catholic, there were Catholic workers there were doctors, there were communists, there were war tax resistors, there were so many peace groups. There were like women that would come and they'd sit outside the base over on the side, and they'd bring their table and their tea and their cups and chairs, and they'd sit down and drink tea together and have a banner slung between a couple of trees. And there are all these different ways of saying no to these weapons. There were groups that came and prayed. There were the evangelical Lutherans who came by the busloads, and the bishops would come and they'd have a prayer service right outside the base. There were blockades by all sorts of groups. It's not particularly illegal in Germany to blockade the gates, so you can blockade all the gates. And the police let you stay there for quite a while. And then eventually they pick you up and move you. But you don't get arrested as such for that. It's pretty interesting.
So supposedly the U.S. is there with our nuclear weapons to protect the Germans. But the German people, sounds like, don't want the nuclear weapons in their backyard.
No, and in fact, if they were ever used on, well, every day these Tornado, while I was there, the Tornado fighter jets that are German fighter jets would take off and do practice runs. And the US H-bombs, the nuclear weapons, are stored in the protected aircraft shelters that the planes go into at night or when they're not flying. So they're loaded in secret in there. Of course, when they go on the practice runs, I don't think they had nuclear weapons on them, but they could have. And they were practicing as if they were going to bomb Russia. I mean, it just, talk about a provocation. It was a constant provocation to Russia, having these weapons there.
And it's endangering the people there.
Yes.
I mean, they could all die if we start using these nuclear weapons.
That's right. One of the women in town took this case. She said, these weapons are endangering all of us. They're decreasing our property value, but they're also making us all a target. And she brought that case all the way to the highest court in Germany, but she didn't succeed. They wouldn't listen to her. Elke.
So who have been some of your role models, people that you admire over the years, that have helped influence who you are?
Well, I certainly have done a lot of study about nonviolence, and so nonviolent resistors like King are very important to me, as well as Desmond Tutu and, of course, Jesus, who taught about nonviolence on the Sermon of the Mount, are pretty good role models for us. People like Bonhoeffer and the White Rose. The White Rose, the group of youth that stood up to Hitler and
people who are putting their lives where their values and their beliefs were.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, tell us about some of your earlier actions of nonviolent resistance to militarism and nuclear weapons.
Well, I've been part of, 4 different Plowshares actions where we took the words of Isaiah seriously, that we should beat swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. In other words, we should convert these weapons that have nothing to do except death dealing, convert them to something useful for human life. And of course that means converting our own hearts from violence to nonviolence, which is a daily struggle, right? And converting our economy away from this war economy to a peace economy. And just conversion of our lives, individually and socially.
So
So-
you're, I'm sorry.
So
go
we
ahead.
went on to several bases, and we went into Lockheed right here in Sunnyvale. And at that point, we hammered on a Trident missile section. The Trident nuclear warheads, the warheads that are on a Trident missile, that are on the Trident submarines, those missiles were being made in Sunnyvale at Lockheed. And Steve Kelly, Father Steve Kelly and I went on inside and hammered on them and poured our blood on them and tried to convert them to something useful for human life. Of course, we went to court, as most plowshares people do, and the judge would not listen to our defense and didn't want us to talk about international law, and found us guilty. I had kind of hoped that in Germany the judges would actually listen to international law, because having the B-61s on the bases in the US nuclear weapons on a German base is against the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the US as a nuclear country isn't allowed to deploy those weapons in countries that are non-nuclear, and Germany as a non-nuclear nation isn't allowed to accept them under that treaty. And both the US and Germany have ratified the treaty. So it was clearly against the law. And the lawyers in Germany and the lawyers in the United States, their international law lawyers were ready to testify for us as expert witnesses, but the courts would have nothing to do with it. And so we couldn't bring our expert witnesses, and the German courts found us guilty too.
So how many years have you been in prison already for your past actions?
I think about 6.
Wow. And how was that for you?
Well, I think in a way I was fortunate that I could use my teaching skills for most of the time to teach either English as a second language or GED classes. So I felt, useful, and I could help the women there and help them write letters to the court or whatever they needed. As far as language goes, I could help. And so that, that made the time go well.
Wow. And so what would you say, what keeps you going? When you just follow your conscience and they throw you in prison again?
I think, I really don't want to be compliant with this war-making empire that I live in. And how do you withdraw your compliance? First you try voting. Oh, well, that doesn't really work. And you try writing letters, and doesn't seem to make a difference. I withdrew paying the portion of my tax that goes for war making, and that had a lot of consequences for me, but it didn't stop the war making. So I thought, well, I'm still compliant. I'm still living here and benefiting from this society. And I just felt like, well, if I need to resist more. And so that's where I seem to be at.
So your conscience
My
tells
conscience,
you the place you really feel comfortable when you're following your conscience.
Yes, yeah. It's a restlessness otherwise. Now at the Catholic Worker, I have a lot of good things that I'm doing with the breakfast program and with helping people with food and sleeping bags and all the things, but they're Band-Aids and they're very necessary, and I'm happy to do them and I get consolation from that, but it's still not enough, because I keep thinking, why are these people so poor? Why isn't there money for schools? Why isn't there money for single payer health care? Why are we living such a life of poverty? And I say that because even those of us who have a home and we still aren't really in control of what we're doing in this country. Who wants to be part of an empire that is creating war and strife and killing and death all over the world, and causing cancer. All this nuclear testing and radiation is causing so much cancer to all of us. We're making ourselves sick. Anyway, so I want to withdraw my compliance from that and try to make sense, try to do something that makes sense to me and to the community of people that I work with.
So do you want to say anything more about Buchel Air Force Base, which I think is the largest U.S. military base in Europe? What do they do
I
there?
don't think it's the largest one. I think Ramstein is a lot larger. That's where all the drone warfare stuff goes through. But it is the only one with the U.S. nuclear weapons in it. And you know, it's an amazing community of people that came together those years for resistance. And there's a certain joy in that resistance. And it was very hopeful for me that that I learned that people around the world and around Europe want peace. The people. Maybe not the governments, but the people do.
I like the former President Eisenhower quote, "I want to believe that the people of the world want peace, that the government should get out of the way and let them have it."
Yes, yeah, I agree. I like that.
So, what did you do at Buchel? What got you arrested?
Well, we did many vigils where we stood with banners. We did many blockades where we blockaded all the gates, and we sat down and with a lot of people. We held banners and told jokes, and it was a great spirit among the people. We blockaded the roads, and all of those things were not exactly arrestable. The police would take our names and everything, but they would never bring charges. So we also did what the Europeans called go-ins, where we maybe cut a little bit of the fence and walked onto the base. And the one largest go-in I was a part of, there were 18 of us, and we split up into 5 international groups and made 5 holes in this one piece of fence. And the fence, it was a very old fence, but anyway, we had bolt cutters and made little holes, and we all went through them. And some of the people got on bunkers, on the protected aircraft shelters that held the nuclear weapons, might have held them. And then they eventually rounded us all up. We had this appeal to the soldiers and military personnel that told them that what they were doing was illegal according to international law. And we tried to explain it in regular English that this was a crime scene and they were participating in it. Try to get them to resign their commission, to not load the weapons and not be part of that. So that was one go-in, and then there were others. There was one, we had a whole bunch of bread outside the base, and we all met, and then we just walked on to the base with all the bread and said, no, send bread, not bombs. Put the bread on the planes, some of them. There were other go-ins that John LaForge and I at one point wore signs that said weapons inspectors, and we had the appeal with us to the personnel, and we went a different route and went in and got on to one of the protected aircraft shelters that was right by the runway entrance that had planes in it, Basically it was symbolic, but it was real resistance also, We were trying to say, hey, this is a crime scene. This is what happened. This is not according to the laws of Germany or the United States. This is a NATO base. NATO is, you know, people think of it, oh, North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, that's for the common good of a lot of people, but really it's a war-making force. It's a very dangerous war-making force. And it has not ever said it won't use nuclear weapons first strike. I mean, NATO is beyond anybody's control, except the US.
Sadly.
Yeah.
So, did you do this action with others? And talk a little bit about the importance of community when you're doing these actions.
Oh, community, doing actions with others is so important. It's like, you know, you sit together, you think about what these weapons are about, maybe you pray about it, maybe you reflect about it, and you imagine what your conscience tells you to do. And like one year we decided to focus on the weapons are illegal, and we had banners and in German and in English, and that sort of was our focus that year. It's amazing what creativeness can come out of people working together and doing what's in their heart, doing what they believe in their heart is right, and looking for the common good. I think there's a certain joy in that.
Wonderful. And will you be in prison with others?
Well, I'll be in prison with others. But I believe there'll be another resistor in with me from the Amsterdam Catholic worker. Her name is Susan van der Heijden. And she was part of many of the actions that I was part of. We worked together on them. She's also a Plowshares activist. And hopefully, we've both been assigned to the same prison, so hopefully we'll be there together. Many of the German resistors have already done their time, and the 2 Americans before me have done time in prison too.
So what are some of your hopes about what changes you hope your action can help make in the world, inspire others?
When we go on the base, we always do hope that some soldiers will decide not to load the weapons, or will think about it. We hope the commander will think about being the commander of a base with 20 nuclear weapons, and that maybe he won't agree that they should fly with the weapons. You know, we hope for that. We hope that others will think what we're doing makes sense and join us. We hope at least that others become aware of the situation and realize that these forward bases, these bases with US weapons are really not, they don't make any sense. And that nuclear weapons, which are indiscriminate weapons with the radiation and blast that just destroys whole cities, like Hiroshima. If you've seen pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, how could you ever wish that on any other city or any other people? So we have to avoid that. We have to stop that somehow.
Wonderful. In some of your pastimes in prison, what have been some of the greatest challenges for you?
Well, actually the women that I've met have been generally very kind and compassionate people, and I keep thinking, these women, if I thought when I was in American prisons, if the American people knew who was in this prison, they would let them out, for the most part. I know the women are there for 10, 20 years in federal prison, and you know, maybe they've made some mistakes, but it's not worth 10 or 20 years, a lifetime, a childhood for them. You know, they see their children grow up while they're there. It's sometimes when there's been guards who are overly oppressive and just use their power to abuse other women and me. It's very hard to feel nonviolent towards them. That's a challenge for me. Not that I wish them harm, but it's hard to not have a hard heart towards them.
And how about boredom?
Oh, I haven't been bored in prison because I find there's not enough hours in the day to do everything I want to do.
Wow.
I don't know what it's going to be like in Germany.
Wow. Wow.
Can you speak a little louder, the two of you?
Yes. So what are some of the pluses and negatives you had mentioned for other people who may be considering powerful acts of nonviolent resistance?
Well, I think you always have to think, even with something like tax resistance, you really have to think about how this might affect your life in 10 years. You know, you have to be committed, but mostly, I certainly haven't regretted my actions at all. So I think if you get together with other folks and talk about it and pray about it or reflect, you stand on pretty solid ground.
Good. And do you have fears about your time in prison? And how do you deal with those fears?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I search to see if I'm anxious about it, and of course there's some anxiety. I don't know German. I mean, I know some German, I can understand some, but not much. And I know that I don't like being in solitary, so I hope that doesn't happen. But I just have to be indifferent and let go of that because I'm not in control. And it's all a consequence of doing these actions, which I believe were truthful and the right thing to do. And I think I'm ready to let whatever happens happen.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Are there other things you'd like to share with others about the need to get more actively involved in acting and building a powerful movement to abolish all nuclear weapons before they abolish us?
Get together with your friends and organize, you know. That's what's important. There's a lot of information out there with Nuke Watch and the Nuclear Resistor. Come to Lockheed Martin with us. I think getting together with your friends and figuring out what the best thing to do is the most powerful.
Great.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's like the 4 African American students at Greensboro, North Carolina, that started the sit-ins. They decided they could no longer live with segregation.
Yeah.
And did the simple thing and went and sat down to get something to eat and instead were arrested. And that was like a match that inspired young people all over the South to go and challenge segregation in their communities. And it was the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, which brought about major... So Susan, I understand there are 64 peace groups in Germany that are going to be walking with you from the base to prison.
Yeah, it's the person who's coordinating those 64 groups, Marion Kupker, has organized a walk from the Buckel base where the U.S. nuclear weapons are to the prison, JVA Rohrbach, where I'm going to be going. And it's about 111 kilometers. And so there's a number of people, maybe around 15 people will be walking with me, and we'll be walking with banners and on hiking trails and on roads and it's going to be a lot of fun and a good way to talk about the prison and the base, to talk about the base, and that my thinking was in a way that we're all imprisoned by these nuclear weapons. They imprison our imagination, and they take the money away. They're a theft from the poor. They're a theft from all of us, and a theft keeping us at a survival level instead of real life where we can have control over our lives. So
That's going to be a wonderful support and send-off.
it is. The German people have been very supportive and very kind around this prison time.
Their lives are at stake,
Well, yes.
as ours, all of ours are.
Yes.
How do you spend your time while you're in prison?
Well, you have to take time in prayer, right? Or I do. And then you need to exercise. Well, I do. I like to walk with other people and figure out some way to get some exercise to stay healthy. And then you have your job, which mostly was teaching, but sometimes was other things. And then I learned, I was in the pottery class. Some of the political prisoners had a pottery class, which I took. And then the last time I went back, they said, well, you can teach pottery this time. So I was teaching pottery. So seems like there's always plenty to do. When you're teaching and you have 2 classes, then you've got papers to correct and plan for the next day and all that. I mean, it's like having a full-time job on the outside, so.
Yeah. So it's not just a waste of time.
No. And then, being in the prison brings a certain dignity. I mean, people learn that it's not, the people can be there who have regular jobs and who, I don't know.
So what advice do you have for others about dealing with their fears of spending time in prison? I mean, I think everybody would agree with you that nuclear weapons are stupid and they will abolish us if we don't abolish them. But they're afraid about spending months and months, years in prison. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share with them as they wrestle with their own hearts and consciences?
I think fear and faith are opposites. I think we have to believe that what we're doing is the most imaginative and best thing we can figure out to do, and that our call to love one another is stronger than that fear. That's the best I can think of.
Right.
And it's helpful to be in a group that's trying to discern all that than trying to do it alone.
Mm.
That's why we need to be in groups.
And how can people support you while you're in prison?
They could send a letter. That'd be a handy thing to do.
Do you have an address or? is there a way we can-
The Nuclear Resistor website will have the address, as well as the Nuke Watch website will have my address.
Okay, and they can find those on the internet.
They can. Or they could support, if they're local, they could support the Catholic Worker House in Redwood City.
Do some of the hard work you usually do
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
getting food to people. So are there other things you'd like to share with people about just
Well, I don't know. I'm very thankful for Marion and John, who set up the U.S. delegations to Germany and set up the peace camp, and to all the people that I did actions with that made it possible for me to witness against these weapons. And I'm thankful to the lawyer who came, because he's in the lawyers group against nuclear weapons, came out to help me. So I have a lot of gratitude, and to you too, David, for helping me.
So it's a feeling of gratitude rather than fear or
Yes,
hopelessness.
that's right.
And it looks like you're not ready to give up anytime soon.
Well, I don't have plans yet for that.
Well, thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you, David.
It's,
And thank you, Art.
Thank you, Susan.
and you'll be in our hearts and our spirits.